Our professional development webinar series. As a reminder, to those of you who have come back and those of you who are new, that our goal in the series is to provide parish staff, as well as volunteers and diocesan ministers, the formation, the training, and the tools that they need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, Sister Janet Schaeffler will be providing us with best practices in faith formation for mature adults. My name is Jared Dees. I'm the Content Marketing Manager at Ave Maria Press, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. Before we begin, I want to say a quick thanks to our partners in this series, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Catholic Family Life Ministries, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests Councils. We're very grateful for their continued partnership, of course, in this series and in this webinar. So just some technical info. You can ask questions, and a number of you have already jumped in and said a few questions or said hello in the question section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed on your screen here. We'll save those questions towards the end of the presentation and get to them, as many of them as we can, before we end today. The webinar is also being recorded, and we are going to send a recording out to you that are here live, but also those who are not able to make it, we'll send a recording out later this week via email. So with that, I want to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter, Sister Janet Schaeffler. She continues the ministry that she was involved in for many years in parishes and as a director of adult faith formation in the Archdiocese of Detroit. She facilitates retreats, parish missions, workshops, online courses, and a number of other things. Sister Janet created and publishes Gems, a monthly newsletter from an ongoing international best practices study on adult faith formation. In April 2010, she received the Distinguished Service Award in Catechetics from the NCCL. She has been named as one of the people who have made a significant contribution to the field of Christian religious education in North American context by the Christian Educators of the 20th Century Project, the Talbot School of Theology. So Sister Janet, thanks so much for being with us and presenting today. I'm going to hand over controls to you so that you can show us your presentation.
Okay. All set?
Yep, all good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jared. And thanks everybody for being here. This particular webinar was scheduled for January, which we had to move because at that time I was having surgery for a broken ankle. So thanks for staying with us and coming back for today. This really is one of 4 webinars that we've done on adult faith formation for the seasons of adults. And just to remind us of that, I'd like to share this short reading with you. A group of 45-year-old girlfriends discussed where they should meet for dinner. Finally, it was agreed upon that they should meet at the Ocean View restaurant because the waiters there had tight pants and nice buns. 10 years later, at 55 years of age, the group once again discussed where they should meet for dinner. Finally, it was agreed that they should meet at the Ocean View restaurant because the food there was very good and the wine selection was great also. 10 years later, at 65, the group once again discussed where they should meet. It was agreed that they should meet at the Ocean View restaurant because they could eat there in peace and quiet, and the restaurant had a beautiful view of the ocean. 10 years later, at 75, the group once again discussed where they should meet for dinner. Finally, it was agreed that they should meet at the Ocean View restaurant because the restaurant was wheelchair accessible and had an elevator. 10 years later, at 85 years of age, the group once again discussed where they should go for dinner. Finally, they agreed that they should meet at the Ocean View restaurant because they had never been there before. So that might strike us as funny and perhaps true, and yet at the same time, even though many descriptions of the various generations are true, at the same time we need to remember that the descriptions are always generalities. We can look at these generalities, of course, that define a generation, but at the same time we have to remember that the underlying guideline is that every person is an individual. The hallmark of any adult gathering is its heterogeneity, which means that adults are more likely to be different from one another than the same. So for instance, a group of 60-year-olds is probably going to be different from 40-year-olds, and yet we can never say that all 60-year-olds are the same. One research study tells us that the media often portrays the members of the baby boom generation, which is the generation we're talking about, as a monolith. 77 million people thinking, acting, behaving, and buying all in the same way. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, members of the boomer generation are more different from one another when compared to members of either younger or older generations. There's another research study which you can read about in this book, and these authors group baby boomers into 6 distinct groups. So even though they're all the same generation, they have also said that there's sub-generations within those groups, subgroups. So it just reminds us that no adult, and especially no adult of this age group that we're talking about, is exactly like another, which of course is true for all the generations. Even though that's very true, it's always a both and thing. So it's also true that there are some characteristics which come to mind, and we can substantiate it from our own experience as well as from research that we could say are true for most mature adults. One thing that's interesting is when we talk about mature adults today, in reality, we're talking about a whole new chapter of life. We used to talk about, maybe 15 years ago, we used to talk about midlife, which focused on career and child rearing, and old age, which was, we thought of as traditionally being marked by increasing fragility and diminishment. Now, because of increasing lifespans, more attention to health, and some other factors, we have this new stage of life, 55 to 75 years of age. So let's take a couple seconds, and in the chat box, would you type just a word or a phrase that comes to your mind when you think of the adults in this age group? And then Jared, would you just hold those for a couple minutes? We'll come back to them in a few minutes. Okay, so just a word or a phrase that comes to your mind when you think of maturing adults between 55 and 75. And while you're typing, if you can multitask, let me just share with you a few facts about this age group. There are 108.7 million people over 50. This includes 76 million baby boomers, people born between 46 and 64. People over 50 are going to continue to grow over the next decade by the tune of 19 million, versus a growth of only 6 million for the people between 18 and 49. Another fact is that a third of boomers, over 23 million, are single. More than ever, the singles population doesn't consist just of widows and widowers, but also of those who are separated and divorced, as well as those who've remained single all their lives because of choice. 8 million boomers never married. Another 4 million are living with a partner but not married. One of the research studies says that the typical boomer between 55 and 75 regularly participates in an average of 10 activities a week. And the participation is beyond just going to church or gardening. So they're very involved in life. And one other statistic, our average life expectancy has risen from 47.3 years in 1900 to 78.3, and probably will continue to rise. So before we look at some possible opportunities for faith formation, let's just look very quickly at 11 general characteristics for mature adults, because it's important to know what the general characteristics are, even though this group is wide ranging, because what we offer them is going to flow from the reality of their lives. So mature adults are experiencing changes, especially physical changes, but they don't see themselves as old. More and more research says that today's maturing adults do not expect to think of themselves as old until they're 81. Okay? But the reality is they are experiencing physical changes. And yet they're seeking to stay physically and mentally fit. What about changes mentally? The stereotype is that our mental capacities begin to diminish as we get older. This book mentions some of the research that's going on today, which says that brain activity improves with age. The mind gets sharper at a number of vitally important abilities as we get older. There's another book that I'd recommend if you're interested in this. This book is fascinating and really excellent about the mind of the people who are getting older. So connected to this, to mental abilities, of course, is learning. Baby boomers are considered to be the most educated generation of people who firmly believe that lifestyles are dependent on higher levels of education. And as with most adults, they of course embrace learning if the outcome of the learning will answer life's questions, prepare them for new opportunities. And Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot says that one of the people she interviewed for her research says, "I'm interested in going slower and deeper, not faster and farther. I want to become wise, not just smart." Okay. Another thing to look at, characteristic, is the work-life balance. And most research or anecdotal studies will say there is no balance. This is the age group that invented the 50-hour or the 60-hour work week, and they're often referred to as workaholics. For many of them, they worked long hours to establish their self-worth, their identity. For many of them, their work ethic was equal to their worth. So as a result, many of them have an imbalance between work and family life, or work and the rest of their life. And the reality is that more and more people in this age group are still in the workforce, which brings us to retirement. In reality, the word retirement no longer has the same meaning that it used to. Today, many people just move from one phase of life to another. For many mature adults, as they begin to disengage from their primary careers, they're launching second or third careers. They're developing new identities and new ways to be engaged. They're blending part-time work, volunteering, civic engagement, travel, new interests, and for many of them, their role as grandparents. So for many, retirement is embraced and life is experienced as the best is yet to come. Yet for others, there's another way of viewing it. Many people have worries about retirement. And one of the main worries, of course, is finances. They worry about having sufficient health care, insurance coverage, providing for their own or their spouse's long-term needs. Another book that looks at retirement in different ways is this one that you might want to check. Refire, Don't Retire. So retirement is a transition issue. Another significant transition for people at this age is the reality of facing death, the death of people close to them, and eventually their own. A friend of mine in her 50s said recently, "As I age, I'm facing death more often. With the sudden death of my brother last year, I've become much more aware of how fragile life is. I fear for the time when my mom dies. I will become an orphan. That sounds a bit funny coming from someone in their 50s, but it is a weird reality. Another characteristic is that family relationships often change during these years. Baby boomers are establishing new patterns of relating to their spouse, their children, their siblings, their parents, friends, leaving some relationships behind and beginning new ones. Many times, marriage relationships change now that parenting responsibilities are reduced, as well as the reality that many individuals experience being single again after long years of being a couple. Mature adults also are developing adult to adult relationships with their grown children, as well as experiencing grandparenting. Also, about 1 in 4 boomers fit the profile of married with adult children who have left home, so they're experiencing empty nest. A significant number of this age group still has children at home, as well as the reality that many of them experience adult children moving back home. Many adults in this age group also find themselves part of the sandwich generation. In this time of their life, they're still caring in some way for their children as well as for their aging parents. Mature adults also are addressing the challenge of integrity. During these years, they begin to reevaluate their lives, to take stock of who they are. And that reevaluation sometimes leads to questioning long-held beliefs and values. And as they reflect on their life, they come away either with a sense of fulfillment for a life well lived and a new direction for the future, or sometimes a sense of regret and despair. Boomers are also often portrayed with the self-centered label of the me generation. But from their actions in this stage of life, it's been said by many people that the label, the we generation, is more accurate because they're caring for others, they're caring for the world. They're addressing the challenge of generativity or its failure, stagnation. They're striving to create or nurture things that will outlast them. They want to be in service to others. They want to make a difference. They want to know that their contributions really matter. Perhaps the key questions for this age of maturing adults is, who have I become as a person? What value, what legacy have I added to people's lives? So mature adults are often moving from self-centeredness to God-centeredness and all that that means. Which brings us to faith and spirituality. As Richard Johnson, who was with us last time, said, as we mature, our spiritual pace quickens. Mature adults seek spiritual growth in this time of significant life transitions and in a time when they're searching for meaning and purpose as they enter this part of their life. Because of various cultural influences, baby boomers were the first generation to make a clear distinction between religion and spirituality. Another reality which feeds into the religious experience expression of this age group is that our culture today, especially for baby boomers, is accustomed to many and varied choices in all areas of life, and then choosing and shopping from among all those choices. And so boomers have taken that shopping mentality that they've applied to other aspects of their life and applied it to spirituality. Boomers who feel that their faith is not providing what they need just go shopping, look for other alternatives. So a summary of some of the predominant Religious characteristics of this age group would include that they're searching, they want to belong, there's a weaving, they're trying to create multi-layered systems of meaning, they're committed, want to be committed to relationships, they have a search for community, they seek hospitality, warmth, welcoming. There's an interest in spirituality more than just belief. Okay? Belief is important, but they wanted to go farther in what does this mean for my life? They want an integration of faith with family, work, politics, education, moral and ethic codes. And they've experienced and continue to experience a diversity of religious needs and expressions. So lastly, let's just take a quick look at generational characteristics. Generational characteristics mean that we're influenced by the historical events of the period in which our generation was formed. So for instance, not all generations were influenced as powerfully by Watergate in the way that Gen X was. So then what are some of the experiences that have formed people in their mid-50s to their mid-70s? Things like the space race, the walk on the moon, the assassinations of JFK, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, drug experimentation, the various movements, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement, Woodstock, the Vietnam War, memories of the Beatles, Lassie, Dorothy Hamill, and lots of others. So all those experiences have resulted in forming the core values of this generation. And these are some of them. Some of them we've already mentioned when we looked at some of the other characteristics. So before we move to now some practical methods and things, Jared, could you share with us some of the words or phrases that people mentioned?
Absolutely. We've got a number of good responses here. We scroll up to, and it definitely relates to what you had said. So we've got sandwiched, maturity, free time, hungry for holiness, spiritual growth. We've got wisdom, experience, grandparents, fancy free, retirement, baby boomers, not stupid. My parents, they're busy caregivers for their grandchildren. A number of people had said that. Hopeful, wanting to feel valuable, very educated, volunteers, dynamic, lost, fun, newlywed, active, retiring early or waiting to retire, letting go. So we have a number of great responses there from the participants here.
Great, thanks, Jared. And so when you think about those, as well as the ones that I went through very quickly, that's their reality. And so that's going to influence, it should influence what we offer in our parishes and our dioceses for their ongoing growth in faith and spirituality. It's got to connect to what's happening in their life. That's true, of course, of all generations. So let's look at a few practices or methods for faith formation for this age group. First of all, before I look at specific ones, there's an underlying principle that I think we need to remember, because what we want to do is we want to think broadly and deeply, and we want to think outside the box. So an underlying principle is everything that we do teaches. We know that our hearts are burning within us tells us that the parish is the curriculum. Sometimes there's a tendency to see adult faith formation as classes, as workshops at the parish. We have to have a different mindset. Anything, everything has the potential to be formative for people's faith. Adult faith formation happens in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of places. So as we think about adult faith formation across the spectrum, but especially for us today when we're thinking about those from 55 to 75, think about, what are we doing? What are we doing, and how's it affecting people? What are we doing in the life of the parish, in the life of the congregation? Our liturgies, our service, our leadership, our ministries. What are we providing for individual study? What are we providing for home activities? What about intergenerational activities? What are we providing via small groups, large groups? What are we providing digitally and online? How are we cooperating with other parishes, other churches to offer things? We don't have to do everything. How are we connecting with opportunities from other entities around us? Libraries, community groups, retreat centers, universities, bookstores. And also, what are we doing? What are we providing for those who can't or won't come to the church? Okay? So keep those in mind whenever you're looking at planning things. So let's look at a couple possibilities. And these are only the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully they'll spark some ideas for some creative things that we might do. So first of all, adult faith formation for mature adults has to be planned and instigated by and with them. Remember, they are used to being unique individuals, and they have many gifts of creativity and planning. They want to be part of the decision-making process. So one best practice would be to invite and form a committee of representatives from this age group to be very involved in the planning, that we're not doing it all by ourselves. Another best practice, some churches today are helping individuals assess their spiritual growth and then identify their needs for learning, that not everybody has the same needs. So then they're giving them suggestions of things available, both face-to-face and online, that could meet their specific needs. So for instance, this church developed a tool that can be used by individuals. It invites people to assess themselves in the areas of knowing God, loving God, and serving God. And then on the second page, what it does, it gives them ideas of things people might do in each area. And so when they decide where they are in those areas, they're then given ideas of things they might participate in the parish or the community, to help them deepen that. And then the brochure also directs them to the website, their own church website, which gives them lots of other possibilities of things they might become involved in. Okay. This church does the same thing, just using different categories. So it offers pathways to help people think about who they are and how they want to grow. So the one we just looked at, they assess themselves through the areas of knowing God, loving God, serving God. This church uses the pathway of the heart, pathway of the mind, pathway of the soul, and pathway of strength. So they assess themselves, and then they have a whole explanation on their website of each of the pathways, and then a listing of all that's offered for the current year, both in a booklet and on their website. There's another one that's being worked on right now from a church here in Michigan. And when it's finished, what will happen is, again, what they do is they have it divided in connecting with God, connecting with others, and changing our world with Christ's love. And then there's different levels or steps in each one. So the person themselves decides where they are, what they need. And so when it's completed on their website, people will be able to click on any of those boxes, and what'll be behind it will be programs or resources which will help them to continue to grow in that area. So another best practice under this theme that adult faith formation has to be by and with them, can be seen in this opportunity, which I'd like to share with you, which is something that mature adults, all adults, can do on their own time. It's a do-it-yourself retreat, and some of the advantages are that it takes very little planning, requires very little media or materials. There's no setup. It calls people to prayer, and it provides the opportunity, hopefully, for a deepened understanding and appreciation of Eucharist and the church as sacred space. So what this opportunity does is it invites participants to spend time alone at whatever time of the day or evening that they want at 6 different stations throughout the church building. So the building is open, people come their own time. To assist them in their reflection and prayer, they're given a handout for each of the stations. And the 3 stations are the altar, the cross, the practice of genuflection and bowing, the practice of silence, celebration of the liturgy of the word, and the celebration of the body and blood of Christ. And so the 1-page handout for each of the stations contains some background and reflection on the topic, as well as suggestions for prayer, reflection, and an action connected to that practice or that place in church. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, Jared mentioned GEMS, and I think some of you are familiar with that. The monthly newsletter that I do, this is talked about in one of the newsletters, and all of the past newsletters of GEMS are on my website, which the URL is there. So, secondly, adult faith formation for mature adults needs to be adventurous. Remember, boomers have always seen themselves as a youthful generation, and they still do. As they mature, they still are searching for new adventures, new experiences. So what might we do? Maybe it means providing adult faith formation in places other than the church setting. What about convoy learning? Using buses or vans. Often for people in their older years, we do bus trips to casinos. Are there other places mature adults can go, which provides avenues for new learning? I think there's all kinds of ones. Adult faith formation for mature adults also responds, as we said a few minutes ago, to their needs. So what are some of their needs? One is they have a need to be with communities of like interest, to be with people who are going through some of the same things that they're going through. So what's available, for instance, for grandparents? That would be one of the communities of like interest for this age group. And the various needs of grandparents. Grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. Grandparents who are passing on faith to their grandchildren. Grandparents who live far away from their grandchildren. At the same time, another need they have is they have a need, to many of them, to be with the people who think differently. So how do we provide for those interactions? To be with people who think differently than they do. One of the realities of this time of life, as we mentioned earlier, is that they're going through many transitions. It's another need that they have. Research tells us that people have the greatest potential for growth when they're in the midst of life transitions. So do we know the life transitions of the people in our parishes, especially this age group? And what are we doing for those transition times? Support groups might be one approach. All kinds of support groups for different transitions that people are going through. Do we ritualize the transitions of life in this age? So, for instance, is there a prayer, a blessing for people who are beginning retirement? Do we develop rituals for transitions which people can celebrate in their own homes? One of the GEMS issues, which I did several months ago, is on milestones. Again, transitions, milestone times in people's lives, and almost all of them in there are things that people can do in their own home setting. Another transition that some people in this age group are experiencing, which we mentioned earlier, some people already began it in midlife, is the empty nest syndrome. So here's a church that's planning especially for them. They refer to them as emerging eagles. And what they do is right now they're having monthly face-to-face events. So coming together to do different things, to have different kinds of discussion, different kinds of input. And then flowing from the idea that they might have a little more time now as an empty nester, they suggest ideas for home use. For those who want, empty nesters who want more help with this transition, they also point them on the website to various online resources that they can use. So the question for us always is, what are the transitions are people experiencing? How can we walk with them through this transition, both offering in-face opportunities and online resources? So we're talking in this section about responding to the needs of mature adults. Another thing that we mentioned a minute ago is that mature adults say they want to be with other generations. How do we provide for that? And not just a family program with the caveat that says grandparents, older people are always welcome, but what's specifically planned for intergenerational sharing? For instance, a summer camp for grandparents and grandchildren. There's one of the GEMS issues. There's 3 GEMS issues that talks about things for grandparents, and one of them specifically talks about one parish that it has been doing a camp for grandparents and grandchildren. Also, adult faith formation for mature adults needs to be significant. Remember, boomers want to make a difference in the world by taking on great causes. So what are the best practices that are going on or could be going on? How do we involve them? Not just in the things that are happening within our parish, but in broader outreaches, building a home for Habitat for Humanity, Befrienders Ministry, Stephen Ministry, reading to the blind, tutoring children. Because some of the best ways we learn is being involved in significant opportunities. Adult faith formation for mature adults also needs to be multidimensional. Remember, we said that boomers are a mosaic of subgroups. They're not all alike. And so it's going to take a multidimensional approach to formation to reach them. Let's look especially at, I think there's multiple ways to use content that's already on the web for adult faith formation, especially with this age group. TED Talks. There's a website, Videos for Your Soul. Another GEMS issue that I did a while ago lists those resources, those 2 that we just mentioned, as well as many others, things that are already on the internet that we can use for adult faith formation. Another idea in technology is there's 3 parishes in the LA area that have worked together on technology. And one thing they did was Device Sunday, where people brought their devices to church. Younger people were there to answer questions, help them. And then during Lent and Advent, every week they gave a handout which alerted them to online resources that could be used, apps or websites to go to. What about, as we think about technology, what about our own websites? In addition to downloadable articles, frequently asked questions, can there also be places for connection or conversation, places to ask for prayer, to share faith stories, or to respond to the question of the week? Also, some parishes have blogs or reflections. Instead of being written by just the staff, they can be written too by the mature adults of the parish. And those reflections can also be emailed to people. So those were just a few ideas. There's also 2 issues of GEMS that I did about a year ago, which explore many other ideas that are being done in parishes around the country and in Canada for maturing and older adults. And some of you are very familiar with this, but in addition to the articles on the NCCL website about the 4 generations, there's also more information here. The book is available at the website that's listed there. The journals are available at the website too, and the journals are free. And the fall 2015 one gives ideas for effective practices, things to do in adult faith formation that are geared to the 4 generations that we've looked at in these seminars, these webinars. And then also there's, especially for this age group, for the generation that we're talking about today, you might want to look at the Pastoral Center, and this is their URL, how to get to it. They're beginning to offer more and more resources for this age group. One of them that's already published is this retreat for older adults that I was privileged to write. Then they also have coming soon several other things. One is, and this one will be free, it's a kit for getting started in adult ministry. And included there is a white paper by Richard Johnson, who was with us, one of the panelists on our webinar last time. Another thing that's going to be available is a small group resource for grandparents that Kathy Coffey is doing, and a guide for hosting grandparent camps. We just mentioned them. And as I said, there's some ideas in one of my GEMS issue, but there will be more ideas in this guide for hosting grandparent camps. Okay, so let's take time for you. What's working for you, especially as you minister to and involve and respond to the needs of people from 55 to 75? Or maybe it's not something that's happening right now, but what would you love to do in the future? So do you want to share those ideas or questions or wonderings in the chat box? And then Jared will lead us through those.
Sounds great. Yeah, feel free if you've got some best practices that you want to share. That would be wonderful to have here. And then also I've got a lot of questions coming in, so feel free to ask your questions as well. Let me take back controls, and then you don't have to worry about what's on your screen, sister.
Thank
There
you.
we go. All right, so we've got a number of, well, first of all, just a simple question about all the book suggestions and the slides. Would you be willing to go through those book suggestions again, or maybe just, or if you want to send them to me afterwards, I'm happy to put them up on the recording page as well.
Okay.
But we can talk about that afterwards. Tara says a book study during the day has worked well. That's a good point. I think having book studies during the day as opposed to late at night, which tends to be a lot of people. Raquel says one of our parishes is interested in organizing a grandparent camp. Can you say anything more about that resource that you mentioned about grandparents camp, or maybe where they can go to learn more about that in GEMS?
There's, right, if you go to my website, which is just simply janetschaeffler.com, one of the GEMS issues talks about what one parish did, how they did it, how they organized it. There's also the Pastoral Center is coming out with a guide for it. There's also a book. I'm involved in a project right now of people that are really internationally, that are gathering together resources for grandparents. And there's a book too that's specific, another book that's specifically written about camps for grandparents and grandchildren. So I can get that title to Jared if we can get that out to you.
Sure, sounds good. I'm happy to post that. Barbara just jumped in and said, we had success with the simple socialization. We started trying to be structured and provide things, in quotation marks, but the group gravitated more towards the socialization aspect and has endured. The team serves them lunch on Fridays each month, and with the deacons cooking and cleaning up once a week, 12 to 3 p.m. That's a good point. I love that. Kind of aligns with what you said right from the very beginning, the first principle, which is everything we do teaches, and that's a really good example of that. Mary says, we had a small group discussion regarding God encounters. People shared their encounters with God and how they changed their lives, and it was very engaging and very spiritual. That's good. Good idea. Mary says, we had a Bible study based in the day as well. There's a common theme with all these examples. We had a Bible study during the day based on choices by group members, and it's been going on for 4 years now. But she's a question I'll throw to you, Sister Janet, is how do you get more participation in something like that?
Well, that's the challenge that we always have. One thing that I like to remember is that even though we always would like more participation, we also have to be aware of and celebrate the people that are already there and remind ourselves, Jesus said, feed my sheep. He didn't say count my sheep. And so sometimes I think we can get so hung up on we want bigger numbers that we're not celebrating and ministering to the people that are already there. At the same time, I think one of the best ways to advertise or to get more people there is word of mouth, is encourage the people that are already participating to invite someone else, to share what they've experienced and to invite someone else. We can do all kinds of things with flyers and invitations, but personal contact, personal invitation is I think the most crucial.
Absolutely. It's one thing that of all these webinars that we've been doing over the years, that tends to be the number one piece of advice people say at every generation, every time we've had any age group. Invite, get people that are participants to invite as well. So
right.
Good. So I'm just kind of filtering through the great responses about what this generation is like, looking for some good questions that came in because we had so many that were here. One is, well, just recently Pope Francis released Gaudete and Exultate, sorry, I'm still getting used to saying it, but rejoice and be glad as the English translation. I know it just came out yesterday, but any thoughts on how to use that in adult faith formation?
Yes, in fact, this morning I almost thought about going in and changing this, adding something to it, because I think I haven't read the whole thing yet, but what I've read, I think it's fabulous. And my experience, I cannot tell you how many times I've done talks or days of reflection or something and talked about the call to holiness and have said to people, do you feel you're called to holiness? And people say, no, that's for you. You're a nun. The call to holiness, which comes from, especially from, not just from Vatican II, it comes from Scripture, hasn't been heard yet. And I think what Pope Francis is doing too in this exhortation is really opening it for us and making it very practical. So I think there's all kinds of ways we can use it. Not to invite people to read the whole thing because they're not going to do that, but to take little pieces at a time. Even to, I'm going back to what one person said about doing a socialization thing and people coming together just for lunches and stuff like that. We can always insert things into that. So what if during the prayer we inserted like one paragraph of that of his exhortation, and invited them for 5 minutes to talk with two other people about what does that mean for them. Um, so I think there's all kinds of ways we can and need to use that.
I totally agree. My same reaction so far, just reading through the first couple chapters. And one thing that struck me was just that it's not religious. We talk about being religious or spiritual, but how about just being holy? That's kind of, you ignore both sides and just say this is what really is important. Yeah, really fun. If you haven't taken a look at it yet, it's great. Great insights there. Kevin jumped in here, said from Boise, some part of a Hispanic and Anglo dialogue coffee and conversation each Tuesday. It's attended mostly by mature adults, and we talked again today about the fact that many of the cradle Catholics are unfamiliar with the Catechism or remain in a dualistic framework versus holistic approach. Could you address some innovative ways to integrate the Catechism into an abiding with this group? Thoughts on that?
Um, there's probably lots of ways. Again, one of the maybe best ways is to do it, not to offer a whole class or a whole course or a 6-week thing on the catechism, but to take bits and pieces. The, the United States Catechism, too, is helpful because it gives real stories of people. And, and so that can be an inroad into helping people talk about it and relate it to their own life. So again, not, you know, not to necessarily do a 6-week course on it, but to integrate it into things that's already happening. Somebody mentioned too having a book club. Well, maybe the book study is on a topic that also relates to a topic that might be in the catechism. So again, in your opening prayer, for hopefully, as you come together for the book club, is to take 10 minutes to look at what the catechism says about prayer, or what the catechism says about relationships with one another and with God, which maybe too are come through in the book study that you're doing.
Good. And we've got great, good suggestion here from Susan. She says the U.S. Catholic Catechism for Adults is a great resource. That's very true. Of kind of user-friendly version of the CCC biographies at the beginning of each chapter. She says can be sources for discussion on holiness. That's a good point. David jumped in and said a minute ago, says that their seniors are thirsty for unpacking the recent papal documents. Pope Francis has made it very accessible and easy to enter into them. He mentions the ones that just came out that he's written so far. Somebody had just said that we've had David said we had great success at diocesan level of gatherings during the afternoons, again, afternoon time. Our hope being that the participants, will return to offer similar opportunities in their parishes. It's a good model to follow there. Teresa says we are doing successful. I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I can just go back to your comment before that about people wanting to unpack Pope Francis's documents. A couple resources too. The Pastoral Center, again, offers a lot of resources where they've taken the documents or excerpts from the documents and related them to real life. Another resource that you might want to encourage with your people, Boston College, Crossroads from Boston College, which is an online opportunity, has several online courses. I'm starting one tomorrow on the joy of the gospel. They have several online courses that are like 5 weeks that people can be a part of. You can also set up closed groups, so it would just be your own parishioners in that group, which again look at some of the different documents from Francis.
That's great. Someone just going to make a point in trying to find the wording of it. She said that we're doing a successful book club, taking one chapter of the adult catechism at a time. It's open-ended and people come when they're interested in the topics. That's a really good, I think, success story there, that if you really focus on the topics, not just the book club or study, as you said, sister, but the topics is what's really going to draw certain people in certain events. We had a few different people ask about the pathways to learning or the self-assessments that you mentioned. I don't know if you could, off the top of your head, remember what those were, or if maybe you're just kind of more using them as examples of of things to check out. But where can people go to find out more about those things?
Again, I could give you the URLs,
Yeah, well,
Jared,
that
if
sounds
that's
good.
possible.
That's probably
And,
easier.
and to be truthful, there, my experience is that the ones that I showed you are from Methodist churches.
Hmm.
I don't know of any Catholic churches, Catholic parishes yet that are doing something like that, the pathway thing. But for some reason, many of the Methodist churches are doing that.
Hmm.
But I can give you the URLs for them.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think people just maybe they seem to be asking about examples of pathways or maybe frameworks, and that's good. And you mentioned a number of resources, and we'll try to collect all that and send it out to everybody along with the recording later on this week. Um, yeah, anything else? So one thing that seems to be we're moving in this direction more towards this, the whole community catechesis again. I mean, that was a big thing a decade ago. Now it's kind of back, and adult kind of family catechesis or family faith formation. Any thoughts on that, and making sure this generation is also integrated into that and not lost amidst this kind of family faith formation movement?
That's a good question. Right. It almost, one thing it might mean is just totally changing the name of what it is so that
Hmm.
people can get beyond that it's not just for children or it's not just for families who have children. Um, and that's a whole paradigm shift. It's going to take time, but I think we got to start talking about it. We got to start inviting people to it. Um, we and again, um, personal invitation is going to be the best. So to get people who are in this generation who've experienced it to talk to others, even to talk about they themselves to talk about it during announcement time at liturgy, and say what it's meant to them, um, and to really pay attention to their needs during the sessions, so that they don't feel they're just sitting there observing others, but that they're involved with their own because of their own wisdom, their own experiences.
Good. Yeah, I think that really touches on some of the things that I really enjoyed most about what you said, is that the fact that this is what a resource we have, and yet it's not that they need to be served, but they need to be integrated in, a part of the planning, a part of the process, as opposed to just throwing programs at them. And that seems to be the experience of a lot of people that joined in with their best practices, and very thankful to everybody that participated and offered their suggestions. This was really a wonderful kind of conversation that we had, sister, and I really appreciate you guiding us through that, and not just talking at us, but there's all kinds of great suggestions that are coming in still, and I think great valuable conversations that we've had. Um, any parting thoughts, or maybe tell us more about one more last time, where can we find out more about the resources that you're putting out, the things that you're doing, and how we can follow along?
Well, my website, as I said, is janetschaeffler.com. On there are all of the past GEMS issues, which um, um, survey a lot of best practices that are going on, not just for maturing adults, but all adults. There's also a number of articles there on various aspects of adult faith formation, as well as faith formation for children and families. Um, I'd recommend the Pastoral Center. Talking about pathways too, um, um, many of you are familiar with John Roberto, and there's a certificate program through Vibrant Faith. And one of the things we cover there is these pathways and playlists, how to respond to people. So you might want to look into that too if you're interested in that. That'll give you more ideas. And then I'd also encourage you to look at um, both. Many of you are familiar with the University of Dayton, their online program, and Boston College's, because both of them have some good courses that help us to look at catechetics today and some new visions.
Good. And I should have mentioned a few people did mention those programs in the comments and the questions, so thanks for pointing those out. And I love what you guys are doing in Vibrant Faith and Lifelong Faith and all those things with John Roberto, and grateful for this is a great way, I think, to cap off this series of webinars, and we'll mention that in more in a minute. But this is been an ongoing series with NCCL, especially the Adult Faith Formation Committee there. And yeah, so grateful that you had some time to join us today, sister. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Well,
you.
want to thank real quickly all of the partners in the series, and of course NCCL, National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, but also the National Association for Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. They've been partners in this series for quite a long time from the very beginning, and we're excited to have their continued relationship in this series. So we are recording this right now. The recording will be sent out later this week by email. You can find this and all the recordings of our webinars on youtube.com/web. Ave Maria Press, also at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. As Sister mentioned, as mentioned just briefly, this is a part of a 5-part series of webinars that we've been doing for the last year now. It's a full year of these web series, and it's been fun to have a real focus, not on children's catechetics, but on adult faith formation. And this has been a great series. All of the webinars in this series are available on the Ave Maria Press website, the recording page that I mentioned just a minute ago. They're also on our YouTube channel, Ave Maria Press is the YouTube channel. And there's a number of articles that were based, the inspiration for this series that you can find on the NCCL website. So check that out as well. Of course, John Roberto is the person that kicked it off, as you mentioned before. He's got a number of resources, and those have been mentioned frequently throughout the series. And thankful for his participation in this as well. And especially for that Adult Faith Formation Committee, it's been a pleasure for me to work with them and be able to help them get these webinars going and be able to offer this series. So thank you to all of the past presenters. One last thing before we go, I just want to invite you to the next webinar in our professional development webinar series. We're going to be welcoming back Dr. Leonard De Lorenzo. He is going to offer insights into a different generation, so a generation of young people who he primarily works with. His new book's called What Matters Most, and he's going to present on how to form saints, not just college applicants. He offered a very similar presentation at LA Congress recently. It was very well attended and very exciting, because we tend to focus in our faith formation or formation in general of young people on this college, and why not form saints as well. And I'm sure he'll bring in some of the insights of Pope Francis's document from this week also. So thanks everybody for participating as always, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week and in the next few webinars and the rest of this season. Have a great week. God bless. Sister, thanks again so much.
Thank you.